In this video, I'm going to show you how to structure your React application in the beginning stages to really make sure that it's successful in the long term. Because honestly, the worst thing that you can do for the application is to start it off on the wrong foot, which basically leads to a weak foundation. And as soon as you start to add anything to that foundation, everything quickly collapses. Now, before we get to that, if you want to go deeper than this video and really any other video on my channel, definitely check out Cosden Code. This is my new coding platform, and we have interactive courses, guided projects on pretty much all of the topics that you need to know and learn to have a successful career as a full stack React developer. You can come here, check out the roadmap, see all the courses that we currently have available right now, and also all the other courses that are planned for the whole next year. And also, if you're the competitive type, you can come in here, check out the leaderboards, and see all these other students here actually learning and taking their career seriously. There's over 230 of them, and it's growing every single day. And who knows, you might be one of them, and maybe you can even be number one. So if you're interested, definitely check it out. It's cosdencode.com, or it's going to be simply the first link in the description down below. Cool. So with that, let's get into the video and let's talk about structuring a good and solid React application. So in this video, I'm going to be doing this using TanStack Start, but you don't have to use TanStack Start. You can also use React Router. You can use Next.js. It's fine. All of the concepts will still apply. The reason I'm using TanStack is because it's my favorite framework currently, and I'm also in the middle of refactoring all of Cosden code from Next.js to TanStack. If you're curious about that, I posted a video. Check it out. So what you want to do, if you don't have an application already set up, you want to just go here to get started. You want to find here the quick start, and then basically run this command here. This would be the same if you're on Next.js, for example. Just have a project set up and ready to go. So here inside of my editor, I basically have an application running, and here I have a simple feature set up and built already to kind of show you all of the different pieces that go into building a feature. And you're going to see that this is pretty simple. We're only dealing with to-dos over here, but this is basically the foundation for everything else, because everything else that we add inside of the application is simply going to be more of these patterns over here, more of the structure. So let's start here. Let's come in the SRC folder, and here I'm going to go inside of the roots folder here, and this is going to have all of the different pages of my application. And these are really important because these are the entry points to the actual code and everything that we have in our application, right? Our user interfaces, our React applications, they're going to have multiple pages. And as a user goes on a page, there's a component that gets rendered, there's some data that is fetched, and then you have the React component tree and everything that you build and write as a React developer. So let's come here and let's open up the to-dos file over here. So this is going to be /to-dos. This is here where we can basically see our to-dos and maybe even edit a to-do. I think that's the functionality that I have set up here so far. So the first thing that you need to know and understand is that this to-dos page over here is what we call a page component. You can call it the root component, right? Essentially, it's the main component that is getting rendered for that specific page. In the case of TanStack Start, this is happening by this component property over here of create file root. This is what TanStack Start, TanStack Router behind the scenes is going to use and render when the user visits /to-dos. Now, these types of components over here, again, they are the entry point to the actual application. Their only responsibility is to take all of the other pieces of code inside of the application and orchestrate them together in what makes up the user interface. So this means like loading some data. This means like checking authentication states. This means like throwing any errors, right? And choosing what error component is rendered. This also means taking the actual components that are available inside of the application and rendering them within its own body. What this doesn't mean is that this to-dos page over here is not responsible for actually implementing any of these things over here. As you can see here, this to-do list component, right, the actual implementation of what a to-do list is handled by the to-do list component. The actual fetching, right, the function to actually fetch, right, the implementation of the fetching is handled by another function. Furthermore, we're also wrapping that with React Query, right? And we're using React Query as our data fetching solution, right? This component over here is only responsible for taking all of the pieces across the application, putting them together, and then that makes up the application. This is how you build a scalable React application that is going to be successful, because everything has its own responsibility, everything has its own place, and everything comes together really nicely to build the actual application. Now, if we go here quickly to the to-do list component, I want to show you again that this also applies further down the chain, right? Further down the component tree. This to-do list component here only receives here an array of to-dos as props, right? Again, this is a very simple example, but you get the idea, right? Everything is simple, isolated, only does one thing. And then here, its only responsibility is to take these to-dos, create here some wrapper styles, which are usually needed when you render something in a list. And then for every single to-do, it is going to defer the actual rendering of the to-do to the to-do card component. And then of course, the to-do card component receives here a to-do as props and then has a bunch of UI over here to actually render out the user interface. But even that, it doesn't do itself because we're using here the card component, right? The card header. These are Chatien components. And only now, right? We're like 4 layers deep. Only now do we actually get to some actual HTML elements. This is how you want to do things at the component level, and this is what we call the single responsibility principle because everything has one responsibility. Cool. So now with that, let's close our components and let's now go to the data fetching side of things because there's also some really cool and interesting things that happen there. Now, when it comes to data fetching, we're doing it here inside of this loader here, which is part of Tanstack Router. This is at the navigation level. And here I just noticed that we have a little mistake over here. What we have to do is we have to make this asynchronous because we basically want to await the data fetching before the component actually renders. Because here you can see the component is using suspense query, which basically this component is going to suspend. It's not going to get rendered until the data is there, which again is only going to be there if we load it beforehand in the loader. This is a really good pattern that you want to adopt because this takes the responsibility of data fetching outside of your components, and it basically reduces the amount of code, the amount of bloat that you have in a component, and also the amount of re-renders, right? This to-dos page component here is only going to render once, and that is going to be initially on mount. Every other time it's not going to render because there's no fetching going on inside of this component. If you had fetching, the component would first render on mount, would render when fetching is true, and then would finally render a third time when the data was actually there. That's 3 renders that you can avoid by fetching directly in the loader. Right, and this is a very powerful pattern. And here again, in the case of Tanstack Start, this also runs on the server, right? So you can do some cool things. You can redirect, you can check authentication and a bunch of stuff. It's a really cool pattern because it makes your component simple and only focused on the user interface, which I hope that you can see falls in line with everything else that I talk about in this video, which is that your application should be made up of multiple small pieces that all come together, and then they have the complexity of the user interface, right? The complexity is in everything coming together, not in the individual pieces. Now let's come here and let's look at this get to do's query options, because even here we apply the same principles. So even here, I'm going to open this up. This is a separate file that we call query options over here. This is inside of the hooks folder of the to do's feature. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But essentially what we have here is we're basically returning the query options. This is available from React Query. And here we're basically passing here the query key and then the actual function to get our to do's. Now, the reason why we did things this way and the reason why this is so good is because now these query options here are basically in a central place in their own file, and they can then be reused across the application, and we get the benefits of not having to specify the same query key over and over again in the same query function. But at the same time, we're not restricted to what hook we can actually use this with. So here you saw that we use this with ensure query data. Here you saw we use this with use suspense query. We can also come in here and we can use this with use query if we want to as well. We can just import this query. We're completely flexible to actually consume those query options in any way that we want. Also, if we wanted to, we can come in here and we can extend our options as well. So we can put things here, we can put some initial data, we can put here a stale time that we want as well, right? We can completely configure this on demand while not compromising the shared reusability of having the query options in a central place. Then we take this even further. Here we have some to-do query keys constants. If I open this up, again, separate file over here. This is the constant file in the to-do folder. This one has all of the query keys related to our to-dos. So here, for example, we have the all, right? This is basically all of the to-dos over here. And then we also have one by ID in case we want to get and modify and do something with a to-do based off of its ID. And this one here simply reuses the actual all property of the to-do query keys. So we're essentially only writing this once, and it's available for us anywhere that we want to use it. Then if I close this, go here to my get to do's function. Again, this is also put in a separate folder file over here. So this is in the server folder of my to do over here. So again, everything is under to do. Here we have the functions specifically because this is the way that you do it in Tanstack Start. You create server functions. Here we have a server function. Again, everything is isolated. Here we're calling our database, right, to actually get our to-dos. This being a server function runs on the server, so this is completely safe. And then we're getting our to-dos over here, which is going to be the result of these queries over here, ultimately inside of this loader here and inside of this to-dos page component here. Right, so I hope that you can see the theme over here once again, right? Everything has its own place, everything has its own responsibility, and everything can easily be composed together. Now, let's come here and let's look at the folder structure of what we have, because this is also very important, and this is how you can scale your React projects. So this here is what we call a feature-based folder structure. What this means is that everything is organized by feature. In our case, we have here our to-dos, right? The to-dos is our feature. Generally, a feature is going to be tied to a domain entity. So basically, anything that you have in your application, like a user, a post, a comment, a dashboard, whatever, all of these are entities, right? And they should have their own folders. And inside of those, you put all the things needed for that specific feature. So for example, here you can see we have the hooks folder, right? So here we put our query options. If you had any other hook that had anything to do with a to-do, you would also put it inside of this folder. Inside of the server folder here, we clearly marked what is specifically only server. Here we have our server functions, which again, we've just seen. These are our server functions here. And then we have a bunch of other things like our constants here. These are only constants that relate to to-dos, like our query keys. Then here we have the types, right? These are all the types that refer to our to-dos, right? Here we're only using the to-do type, and this is directly inferred from the database, which we'll get to in just a moment inside of this live folder here, right? Everything is clear, neatly organized, and of course, then we have our components, and these are all the components related to a to-do. And this makes it really clean, really efficient, and also has the benefit that now you could theoretically take this whole to-do folder here and put it inside of another application, and it would work because everything is organized. And then what you have is you have here this folder here basically acts as a template that if you want a new feature, you want to add posts, you want to add comments, you copy this entire thing, you paste it, and then you have the same folders within. You have components, you have hooks, server, constants, and anything else that you might need for that specific feature. This also means, by the way, that if you're working with a lot of developers, every single developer can actually work on a different feature without overlapping or conflicting with one another, and even within the same feature. Someone might work on the component side of things, someone might work on the back end with some server functions, right? There's less chance of actual conflict, and it's super easy to be efficient and to actually be organized when you're working. Now, also something that you're going to find in a lot of React applications that have a lot of features within them is a lib folder. This is short for library, and this is basically a folder for any low-level utility stuff that you need that has nothing to do directly with the user interface. So things like your database, right? We've seen this here, right? We have lib, db, and schema, right? This is where our database lives over here. This is the connection to SQLite. We're exporting that in Drizzle, and this is our db object over here, which we can use. We also have the schema over here, which has all of our tables, right? This is not something that has anything to do with the user interface. Obviously, we're going to consume that to build the user interface, but this is standalone. It's a database, right? It doesn't really need a user interface to exist. And so you want to put that inside of the live folder here because that's its place. We also have here some general utilities. Again, these have nothing to do directly with the user interface. You have here the environment, right? These are all the environment variables. Here I'm using T3 and over here to basically have server and client environment super efficiently. I also have CN over here. You could argue that this has something to do with the user interface, but basically this is simply just merging some class names. This is like a low-level utility in a way, so it kind of fits in the utils in the lib folder. You kind of get the idea. Now, this lib folder here and its contents are meant to be shared, and this is different. If you saw here before, I also have a shared feature over here. These are two different things. This shared feature over here, this is something that I like to put because there's a general use for it. This is for anything that is UI related that is shared across the application. So for example, components, right? All of these Shadcn components go inside of the UI folder. I tend to put those in the shared feature because that's directly a UI component that is shared between multiple features. This is also where I would put any hooks that have nothing to do with a specific features, right? So for example, a use debounce hook, right? Or a hook that checks the window dimensions or whatever you have, right? You would put that in the shared feature under the hooks. Again, the shared feature, because it's within the features folder, shares the same folder structure as all of the other features. So you could expect that it might also have a constants file, any shared constants that are used across the application, any shared types as well that don't belong to a specific feature, some one-off types or utility types or whatever. That's a great place for the shared feature folder. And that's honestly pretty much it. You don't need anything much more than that. And if you do, there now should be a very clear place for you to actually put all of these things. Because the whole point of this, right, once again, for the final time, just so that you really get this, is that you have small pieces of logic, of code scattered throughout the project, right, all put neatly in their correct place, and then you use those, you consume those to actually build out user interface. You do that at the page level with this component here, but even in the to-do list, right, any sub-component, you also use other things. Maybe here we use a hook, maybe here we use some utility, maybe we have some function, whatever, and then we pass that, we do something with that, and we pass that to another component, which again repeats the cycle over and over again. And this is not something that is complicated, right? I mean, I was able to show all of this to you with a simple to-do feature and a couple of files and a couple of components, right? But that's the whole point. Simplicity is the key. The simple you make your things, the easier it is to actually build upon them, and the more stable your foundation is going to be. And again, that's the only way they're going to have an application that is going to succeed in the long term. As soon as you start deviating from this too much, then you run into complexity issues, you run into legacy code, you run into more code that you need to write to patch some earlier complexity, and it's just a downward spiral, and it's quickly going to lead out of control and basically make your application unmaintainable. And unfortunately, that is the state of a lot of React applications that are out there, and I'm sure that you've seen those, and I'm sure that you've worked on those as well. They are a pain to work in, and that's why I'm making this video, to hopefully educate you so that we can all collectively as a community make and build better applications. So there you go. Now you know how to structure a React application for success. And if you've been watching this far into the video, first of all, thank you so much. I genuinely really appreciate the time that you give into this video. And I want to remind you once again that you can go and check out Cosden Code, which is my new coding platform that has interactive courses, guided projects on everything that you need to know and learn to have a successful career as a full stack React developer. Check it out at cosdencode.com or click the first thing in the description. I promise you, you are not going to regret it. And this goes way beyond, way deeper than I do in my videos. And there's so much content here. It's such good value. And it is the thing that is going to make you a successful React developer. So there you go. That's it. That's all that I had for this video. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Cosden. This is Cosden Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.